Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. It's off topic for January with Greg and I. Glad you guys are here. Today we're going to want to talk about a couple different things, but primarily we're thinking our thoughts on 2025, right? We talked about our goals, but I think we want to talk a little bit about where we're going and where we think the hobby's going for the year. So hope you guys enjoy that, and maybe we'll stay on topic, maybe we won't. We'll see.
Yeah,
Hi,
we'll
Greg.
see. That Hey, buddy,
How's it going?
we could go a lot of different directions with this. Last time we were on together, we were talking about cards that we wanted in 2025,
Yep.
like our goal cards and the different
hmm
tiers and stuff. Um, have you bought anything? Are you close to buying anything? Is there anything on like that you're getting? 'Cause, like you did buy a card, I believe, or you did show a card, right?
Yeah, so I got the Gaddy Ruth. Showed that one a couple weeks ago. That's kind of the big one of the list. So I was super pumped to get that. Um, there's some other stuff that I'm looking at right now. I just um, currently my Grail savings account that we've talked about in the past uh, has enough in it right now for nothing on my list.
Oh, oh, okay.
So so I'm replenishing it while I kind of decide, do I want to do a um like a tier 3 card, or do I want to wait a couple months and save up and do like a tier 2? So nothing, I'm not looking at anything super specifically right now, but hopefully we'll have something to show sometime in February. How about you?
Is that something? Well, first off, let's go back to you. Is
Okay.
that something that? How do you end up deciding? How do you end up deciding? I'm going to go for a tier 3 card, or I'm going to keep saving for a tier 1 or tier 2 card. Like, is it the card presents itself, and then you're like, oh well, I guess I'm getting a tier 3 card, or is it that you just kind of get a feeling? Like, what? How's that decision made?
A little bit of both. I think if I a lot of times I'll kind of just get OCD about a specific one on the list, regardless of what tier it's in, and then that's the one I just go after.
Hmm.
Other times, when when the Grail account is flush, then I'll go after bigger ones because I've got the cash to do it. And then other times, a card that I want that might not be like ready to roll with, it'll present itself in like a great grade, right? Like when I bought my green cob last year, I wasn't necessarily looking to buy that card at that time, but the one that you showed me on Heritage was exactly what I was looking for. So I decided to pick it up early, right? So it just kind of depends on the situation. Right now, I think I'll probably um, look around for some of the tier 2, tier 3 stuff and start replenishing the account and see where we land for February. But there's nothing in particular that I'm chasing at this time.
Now, when the card shows up, so you've got a Grail card, or you decide to go to the Grail account for a card, and a couple of cards show up. How willing are you to overpay compared to comps of that grade? Not necessarily quality, but of that grade. Like, do you? And I'll answer your question about, is there anything I'm looking at right now, and I'll answer that, but there's a reason I'm asking, because
Okay.
there's a card that I'm watching right now that ends tonight, and so I'll answer this for me and your other question for me, but I want to hear from you on this first.
Sure. Um, I think over the last year, I've taken the petty approach of overpaying for everything I buy.
Hmm.
So I think uh, when it comes to comps, if the card looks good for the grade or okay for the grade, I probably won't overpay. If the card looks better than the grade, then yeah, I'll overpay for it. So I think a lot of the cards I picked up recently, not all, but a lot of the cards I picked up recently look really good for the grade. So I was willing to pay on the high end of the range for that grade.
Now, the high end of the range, is that like, so say it's like a card that sells um, on the low end of 1600, the high end of 2000. Okay, just whatever card it
Sure,
is. Is that, are you willing to go to 22
sure.
if it's
22,
never sold for
24.
22?
I go 22 to 24, maybe depending. I mean, it has to be really nice, but yeah, I would say. I mean, with my green cob, that probably is the one I overpaid for compared to comps the most.
Hmm.
But I really liked it, and I thought it
Yeah,
looked really good,
it's
so I was willing to spend quite a bit over comps on it,
yeah.
which is funny because when I look at it now in my vintage card price, it's my worst performing card of the year.
But that's because the VCP is, it thinks like a robot. It doesn't think
Right.
like a person. It can't evaluate the beauty of something and consider that. It can only see the number,
Hmm.
and then it compares it to all other numbers. But as we know, not all numbers are the same.
Yeah, no, I agree. I looked at some of the ones that are pulling it down, and yeah, they're off centered, and they
Yeah.
don't. They're not. They're definitely not as clean. So, but yeah, no, I think yeah. I mean, that was sort of a joke. I mean, yes, it's showing it, but I don't care. I mean, I'm good overpaying for a card if it's if it's especially if it's a tougher card to find in a good grade, right? Like with that Cobb, there's not. I mean, I don't know if there's even. I mean, there's no tens and nines of the green Cobb. I don't. There might be some eights. I don't know, but like, um, it's a card that's hard to find in a grade. At least from my perspective, it's hard to find in a grade above like a two that looks that looks good. That's not really expensive. So
Yeah. Yeah.
and in cases like that, yeah, I'm definitely willing to overpay. I mean, it just depends on the card, right? Like um if it's like a red heart mantle and it looks pretty good for the grade, but it's you know more than the high end of the comps, I probably wouldn't
Mm.
overpay for that because I know that I could find another one that
Sure.
looks probably nearly as good that gets me back into comps. So
Yeah.
in that case, probably not. I think it's just more based on like the scarcity of the card if I'm willing to overpay for it.
Yeah. I mean, the most money I've ever spent on a card is my T206 Walter Johnson Hands at Chest. And the comp at the time, and mine's an SGC3, and the comps at the time were kind of like 1900 for a three for a really bad one, and 2500 for a really good one. And I paid 2500 at the
Okay.
national. And my thought process was, number one, I can't imagine another three being better than this three.
Right.
It had the perfect, it had the perfect centering, it was symmetrical, had the right image and clarity, all that stuff. And then my other thought was, this guy's not going to charge me tax, and
Right.
I don't have to, and I'm seeing it in my hands.
Right.
So I looked at it as like, okay, well, if I found this car, I mean, the high end was 25, this one's 25, but there's no tax, and I think it's better than whatever other one sold for 25.
Hmm.
So I thought it was a good deal, even though if I put it into Card Ladder, it would say you didn't do very well, and I would
Right.
say, well, you know, that's okay, that's fine.
Yeah, and that's fine. Right. Like it's not like you're looking to sell it. So
So I have a card that I'm looking at right now, and it's in an auction. And we're recording this for those of you that are listening. Monday, January 20th, Martin Luther King Day, and it's about 5 p.m. Eastern at we're recording time. And in about 4 or 5 hours, there is a Johnny Unitas rookie card, um, that I know you have one, Darren, and I've been looking for, what I want is a really well centered one more than anything,
okay.
and the corners can have a touch, but I want them centered. Uh, that set. is kind of hard to find really well centered. And
Mm.
I've kind of been open to a 3-ish grade to a
Okay.
5-ish grade. Just not that the grade matters, but just realizing that that's kind of the ballpark. So one popped up in a 3 that is for sale. It's an auction, and it checks all the boxes. And the saved search I actually have in eBay for the card is a Johnny Unitas PSA 5, and then I have a Johnny Unitas SGC 5. That's the saved search, but
Okay.
sometimes it says like similar items that are
Sure.
not exact. And this popped up, and I'm like, dude, that's a pretty sweet looking 3.
Mhm.
So a couple things happened. First, on the image, on the scan, um, the there it looks like there's one corner that's kind of trashed
Okay.
in the listing.
Okay.
So the first thing I always do is I always go to PSA or SGC and I look at their image,
Mhm.
because their image is usually kind of a uniform standard of they all are done the same way, so you get an idea of what it should look like.
Right.
And
Right.
it looks way better in the PSA image than it does in the listing. So
Okay.
I look at that as okay, this as our buddy Mookie would say, this is a wounded buffalo.
Right.
This is an opportunity to take
Mhm.
advantage. And the range of that card is in a 3 because some threes are dogs.
Mhm.
Some threes are really pretty nice.
Mhm.
And I think this is about as good as a 3 could look. So I looked on the range on Card Ladder, and there's literally a $200 variance.
Mhm.
So the card sells for from like 270 to like 450 in a
Okay.
3. And I I've had enough times where there was a card that I wanted and I blanked because I got sidetracked and then I didn't bid. So now I always do a snipe,
Mm.
and I use Gixxon. I don't know if you do that,
I
but
yeah, I use Gixxon. I actually I can't remember what I won one card using Gixxon.
okay. So I use Gixxon, and so I'm like, okay, what's my max? What should my max be? Because the other piece of it is I've personally noticed, and I don't know if you've noticed this or if other people listening have noticed this, but I feel like I have heard more recently, I have seen more recently than ever a high end card for the grade, at least from eye appeal. It is selling for significantly more than one ever has.
Mm.
So, like, there was a 1951 Bowman autogram that I was bidding on last night, and I was like, I'm gonna go strong for this card, and it was a 5, and I bid like $231 or something,
Okay.
and the high end of that card is usually like low twos,
Okay.
and it ended up selling for like 285. Like I wasn't even close.
Hmm.
I was 30% under,
Sure.
and that's like more than one has ever sold for. And it was a really nice example for a 5, but it was significantly more than one had ever sold for. So I do feel like the premium for nicer copies, it's like I feel like the we're starting to see the comps are meaning less as far as the grade comp. The grade
Yeah.
comp is kind of going out the window, sort of like your cob. The VCP says you overpaid, but I've seen it, and you didn't overpay. Like
No,
you underpaid.
I feel
You
comfortable with that
underpaid.
one. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
and that happens to me every once in a while. Like, I bought a few cards in the last couple of years where I go into VCP and I click on the high button and I'm like, "Oh, crap. I've set the record for this card in this grade," right? And I'm fine with that because at the end of the day, I like my cards, right? I mean, I don't, the value. If somebody's like, "Hey, your cob in a 3, not my cob, but a cob green in a 3, is selling for, in a couple of years, if it's selling for like, say 4 grand, I'd say, wow, all right, well, I paid more than that for mine, but I've enjoyed mine for the last 3 years,
Yeah.
and I don't, it's okay, right? I mean, my thing really is the only time I would feel like I would feel uncomfortable about overpaying was like how it was during COVID with, you know, certain like basketball cards and stuff, right? Where it's like, okay, I bought the card I really wanted and I paid, whatever the card is, right? I paid $5,000 for this card, but it's a card I really want. Then like, you know, 3 days later, the same card in the same grade sells for like 1,500. And you're like, oh, like that would make me say, I screwed that one up. But as long as, the price doesn't tank
Yeah.
quickly, then I
Yeah.
mean, I don't mind it because if it's the card I want, then I'll buy it, right? I'm comfortable with my ability to gauge kind of like supply, demand, and pricing, right? You know, if it's worth it to me, I'll buy it. And if the person selling it to me, I overpay for it, then good for them.
Yeah. Now, my dad has told me this story a few times that he played. A long story short, a friend of his and him were talking one time, and he said, "Yeah, it's really depressing because a lot of us, not everybody, a lot of us live in like track housing where."
Mhm.
On the street, the same model is 5 doors down and 8 doors down and across the street,
Yeah.
and so somebody else basically has the exact same house.
Mhm.
And he was saying, yeah, it's kind of depressing. When I moved into my house, I knew that I was paying more to live in the same house as everyone else on the street, you
Mhm.
know, because he bought it the most recently and prices usually go up.
Right.
There are rare exceptions that housing takes a dump. And it's to a certain extent when you were talking about some of the cards that you bought and you set the new high, one of the reasons that you probably set the new high is because it was one of the more recent sales. It's like
That's true.
if you, I mean, how many SGC3 green cobs sell a year? Like maybe three or four. So just and then a year before that there was three or four, a year before that there was three or four, so the last 10 that were sold uh you know could have been 2 years ago that one of the last 10 or two of
Right.
three of the
Right.
last 10. So as soon as you start talking about some kind of high end cards, there is something to be said for that. Like when I pull up comps even of this Unitas,
Mm.
I pulled up comps and they're in a three. There might be like, I don't know, 8 to 10 that sell a year, and there are a lot of the card, but still only 8 to 10 sell a year. So when I buy it, just kind of based on that whole philosophy, it's probably going to be one of the highest right off the bat because it's
Mhm.
the most recent and inflationary,
Right.
issues. So I don't know.
Right. I mean, and that's and that's and I'm good with that, right? Like I have cards where, like for example, my Gaudi, my 38 Gaudi Joe DiMaggio
Hmm.
in a four,
Hmm.
in an SGC four, the price in VCP is still mine, and I bought that card like over a year ago.
That card, I can tell you, is worth a lot more than it was a year ago.
Yeah, and
There are
that's cool,
certain
right? And
cards.
that's the thing, like and and I don't know, like I don't really care about the value. I go into it and I'll look at VCP, and sometimes it's actually I go into it now and it's like I look at it and it's almost like is like a joke. I'll look at the value of some of my cards. I'll just be like, huh, that's funny. Like that one's down, 50% from where I bought it. That's awesome. But like it doesn't bug me. I just think it's almost kind of funny. Um, but when they're up, I mean, I have some cards that are up a lot, right? I have some cards that are up over 1,000%, right? I have other
Sure.
cards that are down depending on the card. I got some Wander Francos that are down about 99%. Luckily, I didn't pay too much for them, but like, I don't, it doesn't, and I don't care about the price, right? So I think for me, like you, right? Like, I'll buy the card I want to buy if I think the price is really off and the card sells often enough, I'll probably say, in this scenario, I probably won't buy, and I'll look for another one, right? But in some scenarios, when it's a tougher card, then I'll say I'll just buy it, and then, like you said, I don't need to worry too much because another one that looks like that won't come up for sale for a while, and hopefully, like a year or two down the road, when somebody does buy one, they'll buy it for a somewhat similar price or more than I paid, and if not, then I look at it as I got a lot of, marginal utility out of it because I enjoyed it for the last
Yeah.
2 years for what I paid for it until someone else, set a price that brought the price down. So I'm
Yeah.
fine with that.
Now, when you know you have a show coming up like Strongsville,
Uh-huh.
and I mean we're less than 3 months from Strongsville.
Yep.
Um, are you less inclined to want to use some money from the Grail account so you can bring more with you at Strongsville, or do
Yeah.
you?
So what
Yeah,
for
go for it.
Strongsville and the National, what I typically do, I let the goal account, Grail account, whatever we're gonna call it, I let that one grow. And last year I picked up some DiMaggio's before Strongsville, so it was a different. My budget was a little different, but this year I don't know, right? Like what I might do this year is I'll let it grow, and then I'll reconsider that account, the Strongsville account, right? If I'm like, hey, it's March and there's nothing that I've picked up yet, um, for like a month or two, and you know, I don't know exactly what I'm looking to get because there's nothing that's just like, hey, that's the card I need. Then I'll then take that budget and go to Strongsville and then go pick up some stuff with it, and that'll be my Strongsville budget. And
Hmm.
I'll start rebuilding it towards potential like goal card after that. So that's the account I would use for Strongsville. So I and last year it worked out well because I got a bonus right before Strongsville, but who knows how that plays out year over year. So you know, I always assume I won't. So I'll probably, if there's nothing that really jumps out at me in the next month, I'll probably buy nothing until Strongsville and just have extra money to spend there.
And when you look at all the auction houses though, and you look at eBay and you look at all the cards available from, your couch, and then you compare it to what's at Strongsville, and I'm not disagreeing with you, but
Mm,
I'll just play devil's advocate for a second.
sure.
So and then you go to Strongsville and there's a much more finite amount of stuff in the room. I mean,
Mhm,
there's really going to only be, you know, 6 or 7 dealers that are going to have the cards potentially that are on your list,
mhm.
based on the list that we looked at last month. And but there are opportunities that might be happening at the auction houses. So, how do you go about deciding I'm gonna wait, I'm gonna have more money because I'm gonna not buy anything, because a lot of people, I even heard last night on the Four Collectors live stream, someone was saying, oh yeah, I'm not that far off from going into savings mode for the National. And it's like, okay, but what if the right card shows up online? Like, do we not do it? Like, how do you,
Yeah,
how's that work?
I mean, I would say if the right card shows up online and it's a good deal, then I'll probably buy it and have less money for Strongsville. If not, then I'll have more money for Strongsville. But from my perspective, if I had a choice between buying it at an auction or eBay or Strongsville, I'd prefer Strongsville for a couple of reasons. One, I get to physically see the card, right? Secondly, for most cards, even cards on my list that like, on my tier one, I if I saw it for sale in Strongsville, it would probably be priced depending on the dealer. There's a couple that wouldn't, but for most of them, they'd price them, you know, reasonable and they'd be willing to negotiate, right? And they don't have to pay taxes, and they don't have to pay a 20% buyer's premium, right?
Hmm.
So I would rather, if I had the choice going into April, I'd rather say instead of going for this specific Grail card that I could see at Heritage Auction, I'd rather not buy it and go to Strongsville and see if I find something else. It might not be that card, but something else that I would enjoy that I could get a good deal on and not pay taxes and not pay the like the 20% buyer's premium or 25 depending on the auction, right? So that's kind of how I would look at it. Um, luck for me this year, I mean, there's we did our list of goal cards, but for me, I'm a little bit more open this year to. I mean, obviously, the last year I was also open to deviating from my list, but this year I'm probably even more open to deviating from my list,
Yeah,
right? Like,
I
there's
am.
no,
I am too.
yeah. I mean, this is a weird thing for me to say, but recently, some of the cards I've been looking at to potentially pick up weren't baseball cards,
Wow.
right?
Now, now I might have to dig into that a little bit because you might be opening Pandora's box. Um, y- why do you think that is? Because I'm the same as you. Like last year, I felt like I was trying to be really focused, and I
Mhm.
was like, okay, not on the list, not going for it. But then I just talk about the Johnny Unitas card that I'm hoping to get here in a few hours. I probably won't, but I'm hoping that I will. And that wasn't on any of my tier lists that I put out. So it's like, Greg, you just like a month ago, you and I sat down, shared 15 cards or whatever it was that we wanted to get this year. And here I am about to bid on a $400 or $500 card that wasn't on my top 15 list.
Right.
Is that a sign of maturity, or is that a sign a lack of maturity?
I would say that's a sign of maturity. Like the
How?
way I,
I don't disagree with
yeah.
how.
So, I mean, from my perspective, if like when I look at the cards that I purchased each year and how they ended up, not why I bought them, but how they ended up being of interest to me to consider, right? 2 years ago, most of my goal cards, like my first year on YouTube, my most of my goal cards were rookie cards of in my opinion, the 50 best baseball players of all time.
Mm,
Some weren't rookies, some were, for certain players, I can't swing the rookie, so I got, just another playing days card. But for the most part, it was rookies or iconic playing days cards of the 50 best players of all time, right? And when I started my list at, I think I had like 25 of them. So I had to buy 25 more. So those were the cards on my list. Those are the ones I was focused on because I wanted to pick them up because for me, that's iconic. And, I was like, well, what's the best way for me to show these? Let me just do a countdown of the best players and then show cards, right? So I didn't buy the cards to do the countdown, but I bought the cards because I wanted to buy the cards of the most like the best players of all time, in my opinion. But then I figured by doing it that way, doing a countdown video is the best way to show them. So that's how I got my, so that was my goal card 2 years ago, right? Last year, it wasn't really rookie stuff. It was more iconic, in my mind, iconic cards, right? And I picked a lot of them up. So this year I'm looking at it and saying, well, there are other cards, pre-war stuff that I'm definitely interested in that I'll probably pick some up of. But at the same time, there are fewer of the big iconic cards in base for baseball that I haven't bought because I picked a bunch up last year. There's obviously still, a dozen or so big iconic cards I haven't purchased yet, but a bunch of them I'm not going to ever get, right? I'm never going to get a M1015 Ruth. I'm never going to get a T206 Wagner. I'm never going to get a T206 Eddie Plank. I don't have a 52 tops Mantle, but the way they're priced now, I probably, I might have missed the boat on that. I don't know if they're going to adjust or not. I might have missed the
they've
boat.
come
Like,
down actually.
yeah, they have, but I still the ones you look at that I would even be able to fathom, budget wise, look like somebody put it under their tire of their car and did like a burnout and then put it, send it to PSA, right?
Right.
Um, so for me, like a lot of the big iconic cars, there's still some left that I don't have, and I'd love to get them, right? I would love not even stuff on my list, right? Like I would love to get a Leaf Satchel Page, right? That'd be pretty sweet.
Oh yeah.
That one is getting close to being in that zone of, too late, right? There might be
Very
a couple
expensive. Yeah.
Joe Jackson playing days cards still that might be feasible. There might be some caramel Ruth cards potentially. But outside of those that are all really expensive, when I look at in my mind, iconic cards, like not even iconic. Like, let's say cards, I'm not big on buying cards because of a list someone else creates, but the 300 most iconic card book, right? I got it sitting over here on my shelf. I go through that and I'm like, oh, here's some, the cards in there that I don't have. Eddie Matthews rookie, a 52 tops Mays, potentially 50 tops Mantle someday. Um, the Leaf Satchel Page, those kind of cards. There's a couple T206s that aren't like the crazy expensive ones that I don't have yet. There's a couple of Gaudis I don't have yet. I don't have a DeLong Gehrig. So there's probably like a dozen cards in the iconic baseball space that I don't have yet. And then going outside of that, like I don't need to just get the ones that are considered iconic. I'd love to get other ones too that are pre-war, etc. But a lot of those that I don't have, they're expensive, right? So recently I was looking at them and I was whittling down a spreadsheet list that I created that was a little bit more robust than the one that we did on our video. And I started color coding them red, yellow, green, right?
Hmm.
Red was this is an expensive card, but do I really want it? Like if I bought it, would I be like, huh, shoot, I could have got something else? Those are the ones I started marking red. So those are probably going to come off that list. Then I have the ones that are yellow, which are I'd love to have it, can't afford it in any grade. So, cool. That's on my, win Powerball list. And then I had the ones that I marked green, which are cards that I would like to get at some point that I think, are financially feasible. So I was looking at that and I'm like, well, my green list is much smaller than I was expecting. So I then started thinking, well, what other cards have I seen that I really like? And some of the stuff that was popping in my head would be, 57 tops Bill Russell or a 61 Fleer Wilt Chamberlain, the 58 tops Jim Brown, the iconic cards from football, basketball. I mean, it'd be cool to get a Gretzky rookie, but that's not necessarily like one of the ones where I'm like, oh, I'd really kind of push for that. But I'm willing to expand outside of that because there are some cards that, in reality, I think are pretty good deals, right? If I'm looking at a, you know, a, like a red Gaudy Ruth, the price has come down at auction, but when you go to eBay or even the shows, the price hasn't come down that much versus like a 61 Fleer Chamberlain, that's come down a bunch. Like I saw a
Yeah.
couple of them for sale where I'm like, really? That's all? I mean, it's centered. The card's impossible centered. It's like, oh, that one's
Yeah.
centered for
Yeah.
that price. That seems like a good deal. So I'm contemplating potentially getting some non-baseball because some of the big iconic ones I want, I feel like are people are trying to hold the price because there's just not that many for sale. And I think as they start to sell, the price might come down. So rather than overspend on the big iconic card, which could cut budget, right? Like if I overpaid by 10% on a red Gaudy Ruth and say a two, my overpayment is like a pretty awesome card on its own,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
So in my mind, I'm like, okay, well, there's still iconic cards. Some of them are coming down in value from baseball. Sweet, pick those up. Maybe some non-baseball, but I'm a lot more open to kind of going with my gut. We go to Strongsville and I see a card that I haven't even mentioned ever on my channel, or
Yeah.
even in conversations with you or chats with you and the guys. Like it could be a card that you guys like, really? I didn't even have any clue. I'm like, yeah, I just saw it, look cool, wanted to pick it up, got it, right? So to me, that's like a sign of maturity that I'm like willing to be, I'm willing to be open minded, right? Versus with my list, that to me, that's having my list and not deviating from my list is a little closed minded,
Yeah.
not in like a negative way, but like, hey, I made a list and that's all I'm going to stick with. It's not, if something else comes up that's a great card or a great deal, and I skip it just because it's not written down, and that's the other thing too, right? When you write the list with the cards you're currently thinking about, right? 2 months later, you'd be like, well, why didn't I add this one to it? Why didn't I add that one to it? Why is this one there? I kind of liked it then, but maybe it's not as big as this other one that I'd rather have. So to me, like the lists are constantly changing. So it's more of the list is good because it's like, hey, over time, I would like to get the cards on the list because I think they're all iconic, but it's not necessarily anymore like my 100% focus of what I'm going to do this year. I might buy one more card for my list this year, and like 8 cards that aren't on my list this year.
Now, a question and something we've danced around a little bit in this conversation, and I think your answers are fantastic and super interesting.
Thank you.
But I also think something that a lot of people have asked me a lot about, and a lot of people, again, a lot of these live streams where people are just sitting around talking about cards and stuff. One of the things that comes up a lot is Strongsville.
Mhm.
And if you're if you're Joe from Arkansas and you like cards and you watch some YouTube channels and because you like cards and you like, you like listening to off topic because you like listening to us knuckleheads talk and but you're kind of like do your own thing. You don't really comment in chats and stuff, but you really like cards. Should that guy Joe from Arkansas should he go to Strongsville?
I think so. I mean, if he likes vintage cards, I would say this. If he likes vintage cards, sure. If it's feasible, right? Like the one thing that, I heard people, they weren't YouTubers, but I heard other people talking in Strongsville last year, a couple people like waiting in line to get in about how, you know, my wife's pissed because I told her we're not taking the family trip because I'm coming to Strongsville. And I'm like, whew, dang, I don't know how my wife would definitely not put up with that. But like, in that situation, don't go to Strongsville if it's going to impact your life, right? But if you have enough disposable income to take a trip to Strongsville without negatively impacting everything else you have planned for your family, and you love vintage cards, I think it's worth going. I thought it was a good time. And to kind of add to that, back to kind of your question about what if I see cards at auction or on eBay before Strongsville, I almost would rather pass on a card I really want now to get something different, but get it at Strongsville. Because to me, it's really enjoyable to talk about the cards we picked up with the other guys at Strongsville, right? Like
Mhm.
Topps Maze, that's on my tier. It's one of my tier one pickup cards for my list, right? If I see a really good one and I'm 2 weeks out from Strongsville, I might not buy it because I'd rather go to Strongsville and spend that money on like 2 or 3 pre-war cards that it would be fun to buy because I'd have, all my buddies there. I'd have a bunch of guys that are my buddies that are also like experts in those types of cards to get their feedback on them before I buy them. And then afterwards, when we do the YouTube event to like talk to the guys about it, show the cards to everybody. To me, that's more fun than buying a card two
But
weeks before that's more expensive.
but you've now I don't disagree, but you've now put your answer as as Darren from Colorado, not Joe from Arkansas. So if you're Darren, I get it. If you're Darren, that makes sense to me what you just said. But if you're Joe from Arkansas, you're not probably gonna track down a guy on the aisle and go, "Hey, do you want to look at this card with me and get a second set of eyes and share in that?" And if you're Joe from Arkansas, you might be saying, "Well, $500 for a flight, $300-400 for a hotel room, a couple $100 for a rental car, whatever it is.
Sure.
I could take that money and I could put it toward cards." So why am I going to go to Strongsville? Now, again, I'm not disagreeing with you from my perspective and from your perspective. I get it. It's as much of a like a high school reunion with people you like and cards.
Mhm.
But Joe from Arkansas, it's just cards, right?
Right. And I think in that case, I would say, kind of back to my previous answer of, if you could swing the trip without negatively impacting anything else, I'd
Mhm.
recommend going. And then based on your budget, I mean, to be honest with you, if you love vintage cards and you don't have a ton of budget for cards, you probably don't want to make the trip because the money you spent on the trip, like you said, you could spend on getting, ordering some cards on eBay. That
Mhm.
being said, if you're a little bit more flush, go there, go go to Strongsville and enjoy it, and you know maybe bring money to buy a couple of cars that are a little less expensive. I mean, you really have to gauge it, right? Like, do you want to go somewhere where it almost, if you love vintage cars, it almost feels like you're at like a museum. If it's worth it to you to travel to go see that, then spend the
Yeah.
money.
Yeah.
If it's more of, I want to go to Strongsville because I'll find cars I won't see anywhere else, then I say don't do that, because that's not necessarily the case. So you might find a couple cards that are like, oh, I never seen this before, whatever. But I don't think there's anything in Strongsville that was something that you can't ever find again. I mean, with the exception of the stuff on display for the auctions, they had some pretty
Right.
amazing stuff.
Memory
But like,
Lane had some really cool stuff
yeah,
in
so the
that
stuff
one.
that's
Yeah.
actually for sale though, like that you could buy there, there's probably 3 or 4 cards that you're not going to see again for a very, very long time. But the majority of stuff you see there, you could find other places. So if you just want to go and look at a bunch of awesome vintage cards, go to Strongsville. If you have to impact your family to pay for that as a separate trip and like give something else up, I'd say I wouldn't do it. Um, Especially if you don't know anybody else going. I mean, that's, to me, that's more of the fun part. But I will say, Mike from Arkansas, if you are there and you don't know anybody, but you'd like people's opinion, if you see me, grab me and just say, hey, I watched Off Topic. Can you give me your input on this? And I will.
Yeah.
And if I
Yeah.
don't know about the card, which might be the case, I'll find somebody that I know that does know about it, and we'll get their opinion too. Right. So if
So
you're
we're
watching
already
this, go if it doesn't impact you negatively financially.
we're already over the 40-minute mark. So I know
Sweet.
we had talked about trying to keep this to about 45 minutes or so. So I'll try to wrap it up. But I do have a follow-up question to what you just said. Um, So I know it hasn't been widely announced and formally announced what exactly it's going to look like, but there are going to be at Strongsville a couple of hangouts in the
Mm,
evenings. Um, so your Joe from Arkansas, who's probably cousins with Mike from Arkansas, you were just talking
I
about,
confuse Mike and
but
Joe. My
that's
bad.
okay. But if you're Joe from Arkansas and you're staying there and you're hanging out and you bought a couple of cool cards, why should he go to the hangout and walk around and go, hey guys, check out my cards? Like, why should he do that? Or should why
Yeah,
and if he's a shy guy, why shouldn't he be? Do you personally, Darren, like sitting there at that thing and having people walk up and go, hey, check out what I bought? Like, is that fun for you?
it is. It is fun for me. So I would say yes, he should do that. And if he doesn't buy anything and he just wants to come to the hangout and check out what other people picked up, come to the hangout either way. And if you're super shy and you're not sure who to talk to, find me and just introduce yourself to me, because I'd be more than happy to chat with you. And if you don't want to chat with a ton of people, just tell me. And if you do, I can introduce you to whoever you want me to introduce you to. Right. So if you're going to Strongsville and you don't know anybody, but you want to come to YouTube events and you're nervous to talk to some of the big heavy hitters, come find some, more like, single A mid-level dude like me. Come talk to me and then I'll introduce you to people.
Is a heavy hitter like a Mookie Chilson type?
Yeah, man. I mean, we got a bunch of heavy hitters there. We got you. And to be honest with you guys, when I was at the
I'm not a
National, I
heavy
had
hitter.
multiple people come up to me and say, hey, Darren, is Greg here? I'm like, yeah.
Shut
Where is
up.
he? I mean, he's over there. A
No,
couple
he
people were like,
didn't.
can you
One
introduce me to him?
person did that.
People have asked me to introduce them to you because they're nervous to go up to you. And they know that I'm
What?
not nervous to go up to
Are
you.
you insane? Are you
Dude,
making this
totally.
up
And
right
that's
now?
fine. So, like, if you guys want to go to Strongsville and you want to meet like guys like Mike Moynihan and Greg and Andrew and Dave Blue Jacket and Orlando, and you're nervous to go up to guys like that, Chris from Missouri, if you're nervous to go up to guys like that, you shouldn't be, because they're all super cool guys and anyone will talk to you about whatever baseball topic you want. But if you're nervous, find me, you know, tear down, and I'll introduce you up.
Were you nervous to meet anybody? And if so, who have you been nervous to meet?
So the National 2 years ago in Chicago,
Yeah.
I had never met any YouTubers in person. I landed. I flew in with my dad and my buddy flew in. We all met at the airport. Our old boss picked us up. They're all going to dinner downtown. He dropped me off at the Embassy Suites, and then they all left. So, it was just me. And I'm like, I literally have never met any YouTuber face to face. And I walked into the lobby and I was a little nervous. I'm like, I'm going to just walk up to these guys that have been buddies for a long time, like talking cars. And they're like, who the hell is this guy? Right. I only had my channel for like 5 months at that point. And luckily for me, when I walked in, Orlando was the first person that I saw, and he's like the nicest guy ever. And he saw me, came over, Darren, hey, it's good to see you. And he brought me over to some people, and it was a little less nerve wracking, but it was still was right. Like when I, when I was at the when I was at Mike's thing, it was great because I'm like, oh, there's Mike, and he came over and was like, hey, how's it going, Darren? And we fist bumped. I'm like, cool, and I'm a little bit more relaxed. And, I think to be honest with you, the person I was like most, I wouldn't say nervous, but we were at the bar and Mangini was there and he had like a whole bunch of people around him chatting with him. And I'm like, man, I want to introduce myself to him. And I'm like, he looks like he's real busy right now. So I kind of stood there for a sec, like an idiot, just standing there like a foot behind everybody, not saying anything. And then I finally started chatting with him. But like, that was probably it. Other than that, once I got through that, then I was way more comfortable because I realized all these guys are just really, really nice.
Were
So you
you
don't have to
were you
worry about it.
nervous to meet me?
No, because we had done so many live streams before I met you in person.
Yeah, I'm just messing with you. That's
I was
awesome.
I was I was nervous the first time we did a live stream.
Okay.
Yeah, I was like, this is
I was
like,
probably nervous too.
why?
I I don't know. I don't know. I've gotten to the point now where I don't usually get nervous doing a collaboration. But for some reason, when I'm hosting a live stream like we did the other day,
Mhm.
I do get more nervous. But
That's probably more of like a production nervous than a people nervous.
maybe, maybe we could talk more about that when we chat soon
Okay,
about our wrap up of that because that's
sure.
coming soon as well. But we're at 47 minutes. We should probably wrap it up. I think it's funny how our natural our natural spots that we fall, whenever we have a conversation like this, is it's sort of like with any duo, there's sort of like the play-by-play guy, and then there's sort of like the color commentator, and the like it with Mike, Greeny and Golick. The play-by-play guy is more of Greeny, and the color guy who is answering more of the questions is sort of Golick. And I kind of feel like you're the Golick and I'm the Greeny. Would you agree with that?
I agree with that. I appreciate you not referring to me as the Tom Brady because he sucks at commentating. So I'm glad you didn't. I'm glad you didn't diss me
Well,
like
we don't want to use. I'm not a big Joe Buck guy. In fact, I'm very much not a Joe Buck guy. But in the roles of commentating a football game, I would probably be the Joe Buck, and you would be like the Tony Romo.
he struggled the other night too.
Did he?
Yeah,
I haven't been watching. For me, well, that's a whole. Well, I could go on a whole rant, and I honestly, if you look at this conversation as we wrap this up here, we started with talking about a year. What is 2025 going to look like, and what to expect, and we stayed on that for about 3 minutes, and
right.
then we immediately hit a whole bunch of other stuff.
Hmm.
So the thumbnail probably is going to say something like, "What 2025 predictions and expectations." And after 3 minutes, people will go, "These guys are insane."
Right. Like we were talking how to get introduced to people at Strongsville, right? Like totally
Uh,
aligned.
All right, we'll wrap
Right
this
on.
thing up. I always had fun. I always have
Me
fun
too.
talking to you, whether we're on topic or off topic. I couldn't care less.
Me too. Always fun. Well, thanks everybody. Appreciate it. If you stuck around, we're about to hit 50 minutes. So thank you for sticking around and listening to us ramble on. And hope you guys enjoy. For those of you that are still watching, thank you, and we will catch up with you guys next time. Talk to you guys later.
See ya.